What if your favorite game on Roblox suddenly vanished before your eyes, and nobody remembered it existed? One day, millions of players could be logging in, the next, nothing. And the memories that millions of people once shared are suddenly trapped in the past. For a platform as massive as Roblox, this isn't as unusual as it sounds. Over the years, some of the biggest games in Roblox history have disappeared for reasons ranging from devastating exploits to controversies that completely changed the course of the game. And what's even stranger is that some of these games weren't small projects that nobody knew about. They were played by millions. They had enormous communities. Some were even considered legendary. But today, you can no longer play them the way you once could. So what happened? Why did these games disappear? And how can something that was once so popular simply vanish? To find out, we need to go back to the beginning. Because every one of these games has a story. And sometimes the reason a game disappears is far more complicated than anyone expected. Before simulator games dominated Roblox, there was a different kind of game taking over. The formula was simple: lift, get stronger, sell your strength, and then do it all over again. It was the era of the Roblox simulator. At first glance, the game looked almost ridiculously simple. You spawned into a map, picked up a weight, and started clicking. Every click made your character stronger, and the stronger you became, the more powerful you looked. It was the perfect formula for Roblox, because the game didn't require you to understand complicated mechanics. You just had to keep playing. And before long, it became a massive success. Thousands of players were lifting. And eventually, the game became one of the most recognizable simulator games of its time. But as quickly as the game rose, problems started appearing, because the simulator genre was becoming extremely competitive. Games with similar mechanics started appearing everywhere. And before long, the game became caught up in a larger controversy surrounding copied games and ideas. But this wasn't the only problem. The developers themselves became increasingly distant from the game. The community began to lose interest, and eventually the game that had once been played by huge numbers of Roblox users was effectively abandoned, because it didn't disappear in one dramatic moment. There wasn't necessarily one final day when everyone suddenly realized, the game is gone. Instead, it slowly faded. Sometimes, a game doesn't simply fade away. Sometimes the entire experience is destroyed by the very people who were supposed to be playing it. Imagine joining a Roblox game and realizing that absolutely nothing matters. You don't have to win, you don't have to complete missions, you don't even have to do anything. You can simply fall. That was the entire appeal. The game was built around one of Roblox's most entertaining features: physics. Players could throw themselves around the map, fall from massive heights, and watch their characters flop around like actual ragdolls. It was chaotic, and somehow, it was incredibly fun. The game became one of the most visited experiences on Roblox. For some people, it was just a place to mess around with friends. It became a classic, and because of its enormous popularity, it eventually became one of the most recognizable deleted Roblox games. But the story of its disappearance begins with something much darker: a major exploit. In 2021, the original experience became the target of a serious hacking incident. And this wasn't just some random player using an exploit to fly around the map. The incident had much bigger consequences. The game was compromised, and eventually, the original experience was made private, but then things became even more complicated. The creator of the game was terminated from Roblox, and suddenly the game that had been visited by millions of people was no longer publicly accessible. One of the most popular experiences on the platform couldn't simply continue as normal. The game was gone. The original experience was private, and the creator behind it was no longer on the platform. For the players who had spent years inside of the game, this was a huge change. Because unlike a game that slowly loses popularity, this one had been ripped out of the platform's history. One moment you could search for it, the next you couldn't. And that created an unusual situation, because it wasn't forgotten. In fact, the opposite happened. And suddenly, the game became something that could only be experienced through nostalgia. Of course, there were other experiences that tried to capture the same feeling, but for many players, they weren't the original, and that's what makes the story so fascinating. It wasn't a game that simply disappeared because nobody cared. It disappeared despite having an enormous audience, and even years later, people still remember it. But there is one more game whose disappearance had an even bigger impact. A world where an entire generation of Roblox players could become trainers, catch hundreds of Pokemon, battle other players, and explore a massive adventure. And then, there was a time when Roblox didn't just feel like a platform. It felt like an entire universe, and for many players, this was one of the greatest adventures they ever experienced. Take the world of Pokemon and bring it into Roblox. But the execution, that was something else entirely. Players could create their own character, explore towns, and collect Pokemon, and progress through a full RPG adventure. For Roblox players who loved Pokemon, this was practically a dream come true. This game quickly became one of the most beloved experiences on the platform, and unlike many Roblox games, it didn't feel like something you would play for 10 minutes and forget. It felt like a real game. It had a story, and most importantly, it gave a reason to come back. Players would build their teams, and entire communities formed around the game. For many people, this was their game. But there was one massive problem. The Pokemon franchise did not belong to Roblox. It belonged to a different company. It belonged to Nintendo and its partners. And eventually, the game attracted the attention of the companies that owned the Pokemon brand. In 2018, the game was permanently removed from Roblox following copyright concerns involving Nintendo. And just like that, the adventure ended. Imagine spending months exploring a world, making memories with your friends, and then one day, it's not there anymore. The game that so many players had grown up with had disappeared. The community was devastated, because it wasn't just another Roblox game, and its removal became one of the most memorable moments in Roblox history. But there was something else that made the story even more interesting. The developers weren't simply finished making games, and one day, the people behind the game would go on to create another Roblox experience, one that would become enormous in its own right. But the original game was never coming back. The adventure was over, and for the millions of players who experienced it, all that remained were memories. Only to become caught in controversy and eventually fade away as its developers abandoned it. A physics-based phenomenon that became one of Roblox's most visited deleted experiences, before an exploit and determination of its creator brought its original story to an end. Destroyed by copyright concerns and permanently removed from the platform. 3 completely different games, 3 completely different stories. But they all share one thing: they disappeared. And that's something unique about Roblox, because the platform is constantly changing. Developers come and go, and sometimes an experience that millions of people once played can become almost impossible to find. But perhaps that's why these games are remembered so fondly. Because when a game is still around, you'll assume you'll always be able to come back. You think you'll play it again someday. You think the memories will always be waiting for you until they aren't. And even if Roblox eventually forgets about them, the people who played them probably never will. Because sometimes the most unforgettable Roblox games are the ones you can never play again.